of chiropractic at the Rock Health and Wellness Center, and you are listening to Life with Jason Clemmons, DC, on this beautiful Wednesday, November 1st, from right here in Lubbock, Texas, at the Rock Health and Wellness Center studios, and coming to you on 98.7 Walk by Faith Radio and 1420 AM Lubbock Christian Nation. So we are right here. People, we got extra people in the studio tonight laughing at me. And so that's awesome. But it's a great night. It's going to be a fun show. We've had some connection problems this week. No problem. We'll just get over it, right? We'll just move along. And we've had some good teachings this week. We've had some good shows this week, and I'm super excited about tonight. I don't get these opportunities very often to come across something like I did this week, and I just think it's going to be fun to talk about. It's really it's going to be fun. It's going to be a good book. It's a good book that Wednesday night is our book review night. And so every Wednesday night, we just take one of the books that I've read somewhere along the way, and I just try to give you my take on it. That's one of the things that I think is kind of special about this show. It's just my life shared with you, so that maybe you can take little pieces and bits and pieces of what I study and what I learn, and you could carry it into your life, and maybe it'll make your life better. It's by no means an expert talking about, anything. I never have really considered myself. I know President Trump would probably say, "Don't tell everybody that," but that's the truth. But it's not. There's so much stuff you can do with wellness. Like this week, I was listening to somebody talk about grounding, like take your shoes off and go outside and get yourself grounded, right? And I heard them say, no matter what else you're doing with health and wellness, if you're not grounding, nothing else matters. And okay, that may be 100% true. I don't know. I haven't studied grounding that much. That could be completely made up. I don't have any idea. I just take my take of it. I just think, well, the oldest living people in the world are in Okinawa, have been ever since I've had my chiropractic practice. Some island in the Mediterranean and some place in Okinawa, and so it's like, what do? They ground themselves every day? I don't know, right? So maybe they do. Maybe that's why they live so long. So what I'm saying is, I just hear these things just like you hear these things. And I wonder sometimes where they come up with those ideas and who made that up and does it make any sense? And so those are the things that I do to try to study and learn. And so I read these books and I take my take on them. My background in athletics, my background growing up on a horse ranch, my background being from East Texas to Oklahoma to Roswell, New Mexico, like my background of having the same girlfriend since I was in 10th grade. And basically, so it's all those things that you add up together that makes each one of us special, right? You've got all those same experiences. You've got things that that's way smarter than me in a lot of areas. I was telling people today, they asked me something about voting on something. And I'm like, look, I'm not an expert on voting. That's what all these guys like Robert Pratt are doing. That's what all these guys that are on these political, that do the political shows. They're the ones that are the experts on that. I don't know much about it. So if we all read the same book, if you and I read the same book, we might end up with different takes from the book, right? So I try to do it. I'm just sharing these books, and I think Wednesday nights are fun. We started off with the end of Alzheimer's, and we've done The Body Keeps the Score, and we've done Spark, we've done Cancer as a Metabolic Disease, and we've done The Hacking of the American Mind. And I was thinking about it this morning, how cool this is going to be by the time this year is over. So because I was thinking that, hey, this is November 1st. So we made it through 2 solid months of doing the show. And fantastic. I mean, I'm excited about that. It's like, well, let's keep going. And so we're starting our 3rd month tonight. And it's like, man, by the time this year is over, I'm going to have shared some books with some people. So I think it's going to be awesome by the time we get to the end of the year and think about how many books that we that we have to share. And to tell you the truth, give you a little bit of insight into my life. I was a 4.0 student when I was in high school. We were on a whatever that means. We had honors classes. You got 5 points or whatever, and so I wasn't a straight A student, but I did graduate high school, and maybe my girlfriend had a little bit of help with that. She's now my wife of 30 years, but she might have had some influence on me getting from a 3.9 something to a 4.0. But I don't really care. Sometimes you got to have some help in life. But I did graduate with 4.0 from high school, and I never read a single book in high school. I never finished from cover to cover a single book until I was in college, and I read my first book. I just didn't like to read. I didn't enjoy reading at all. I was in athletics, and I was busy, and I just didn't and I could not make myself sit down and read a book. It was so boring all the way through high school. So I could read the chapter, I could take the test, I could get my grades. I could handle my grades, but as far as reading, that's not something that I did. And I recognize the value of it, and I recognize that, man, it seemed like the smart people read, but I just didn't read. So sometimes I'm a little slow on the uptake, as to borrow a phrase from my father-in-law. And so when I got to college, I read a few books just to get through my undergraduate stuff, but it really wasn't until I got all the way through graduate school and finished my master's and got into chiropractic school that I really started reading. So I was 30 years old before I really started reading books, which it's like I'm just a little bit late to the party. So I got a lot of books to catch up if I want to learn a bunch of stuff. So I'm a little late when it comes to reading. A lot of you guys started early reading, and good for y'all. I mean, my kids read. Not my daughter. She's a visual person, so she has to, or an audio person, and so she has to get the books on tape. But and they're both summa cum laude and magna cum laude graduates of colleges, and so they were in the top 7% of their class at Friendship High School. So that they did a good job with school. We value education in my house. We value college and we value education. So but since I got my chiropractic license, since I went to chiropractic school, that's when I started reading. And now I really can't read enough. And the reading is just, for me, is exciting. It's exciting to learn something new. So last week, before we start, we have a winner of our contest and so the answer is 857. 857 Red Hots will fit inside a 20-ounce bottle of soda. So if you've been following our contest on the show and you know what we're talking about, and you know that what we're saying is you've got how many, when people say, hey, doc, I just have one soda a day, right? One soda a day. And I always think, I wonder how many blood pressure pills you could put in one soda bottle. Well, the answer is 857 Red Hots could go into a soda bottle. So just imagine, I wonder if one soda a day actually changes your physiology. And the answer is yes. And we got a guesser, and she won. So she will be winning the $50 gift certificate to Longhorn Steakhouse. And we will, you guys can be looking forward to our next contest. So the contest is over, and let's move on to the book. So last week was my birthday. You guys know that. I got a gift card from one of my patients to go to Barnes & Noble. So on Saturday, I went to Barnes & Noble, and it was really funny because I didn't want to go to Barnes & Noble. I wanted to come to work. I wanted to get up here to the office and get some things done because I had lots of things to do. And it was really cold and a little bit misting here in Lubbock on Saturday. And I had a patient that needed some help. So I met him up here on Saturday morning, and got him adjusted. And then I thought to myself, there's two places I've been wanting to go. There's a gym that's been built right down the street, and so I've been wanting to go check that gym out. And these guys don't have any idea that I'm going to say this, but hey, if you want to, it's called Gym Culture. It's on Milwaukee. If you're living in Lubbock, it's right down the street. It's a cool little place. It's a new thing. They got reasonable prices. They got a great little setup that they got. They got daycare. They got some Zumba classes and all that stuff. So if you're looking for a place to go, community inspired, people driven, Gym Culture, you can go check it out. So I went down there and checked it out. And then I thought, I could just go back to the office and I could just order me a book. I don't need to go to Barnes and Noble. And then I had a conversation with myself and I was like, Jason, just quit being a punk and just go down there. Take 30 minutes out of your life and do something different than just working every single day. And so I thought, okay, that's what I'll do. I'll go down there and I'll just go check it out. So I walked in Barnes and Noble. It's been a long time since I've been inside the store. And I walked in there and there's like 4, 5, 6 tables right there when you first walk in, and they have new releases, I guess. I don't know what it is. So I was just looking at all the different books that were there and seeing if there was anything that I wanted to read. And I walked around on the backside and I saw this book. It's called The Book of Charlie. And on the cover, it says The Book of Charlie. And it says, wisdom from the remarkable American life of a 109-year-old man. And I thought, man, that sounds really intriguing right there. I was like, 109 years old? Like, how did he do that? Like, how did guy get to, because my target is 113. That's what I'm going for. I'm going to try to live to be 113 is my target. And how did I come up with that target? Well, for years, I was going to be 103. And for all that time, I thought, well, it's kind of a false thought. It was kind of a bad thinking because that's 4 quarters, and I'm a football guy, so that's 4 quarters and then 3 years of overtime. And really, that's not what you want because you don't want to go into overtime. Like that means you're tied when it's over. At the end of regulation, you're tied. That's why you go to overtime. So I thought, that's not smart. Like, you want to be way ahead at the end of the game, right? We want to be winning the game. We don't need any fourth quarter comebacks or any of that stuff. I hope we're up by 40 by the time I get to be 90 years old. But anyway, my brother he's a country music songwriter guy from Nashville, and he's good with words, and he's kind of a smart aleck every once in a while, a little bit sarcastic. And he said, he's not a smart aleck, he's just sarcastic because he's a wordsmith. But he said to me, he's like, don't you think you kind of shortchanging yourself on that 103 goal? And I thought, I just kind of laughed, and I thought, man, I wonder if he's right. Maybe I set myself short. And so I just added 10 years on top of it. I was like, dude, we'll just go to 113. And I'm not exactly sure how that's going to map itself out, because you get to 112 and you're like, do you just say, well, that's enough and stop? So I thought 109 years old, man, I should just pick that book up. So I just looked at it, and then I went upstairs and I went through all the business books, and I went through the self-help books, and I went through the fitness and health books and all that sort of thing. And I was just looking at all those books in there. And it was very intriguing to look at all those books, because the first thing that came across my mind is, how do all these people have something to say? I thought that was very intriguing. It was like, they're making that stuff up. There's not that many people that have that much to say, right? That's what y'all are thinking sometimes on this show. I know. It's like, that boy talks too much, and he really doesn't have all that much to say. It's unbelievable. And that's fair. I give it to you. That's fair enough. But I went through all those books, and I found a couple of books that intrigued me, and we'll get into those books later on. But this little book just kept calling my name. And so I went back downstairs, and I picked up a couple of books upstairs, and I went back downstairs to the table, and I picked up this Book of Charlie because I wanted to know, 109 years old. I was like, hey, what is this all about? And you know what's really interesting as we get into the book? I'll tell you Charlie's life. But the thing that's really interesting about it is it's not about diet and exercise. It's not about chiropractic. It's not about health and wellness. There's almost nothing about it. Matter of fact, Charlie was a smoker for most of his life. So he was a medical doctor. he made a few comments in here about his opinion on things, but it's just a book about why. What I really love about it, it's by David Vandrelli. It's Vondrelli, Vondrehle is the name. It's copyright 2023. And inside the cover, it says, when a veteran Washington journalist moved to the Midwest, he met a new neighbor who was more than a century old. Little did he know that he was beginning a long friendship and a profound lesson in the meaning of life. Charlie White was no ordinary neighbor. Born before a radio, Charlie lived long enough to use a smartphone. When a shocking tragedy interrupted his boyhood, Charlie mastered survival strategies that reflected thousands of years of human wisdom. Thus armored, Charlie's sense of adventure carried him on an epic journey across the continent, and later found him swinging across bandstands of the jazz age, racing aboard ambulances through the depressed area gangster wars, improvising technique for early opening heart surgery, and cruising the Amazon as a guest of Peru's president. Charlie was a cool dude. Man, he didn't stop. So David Vondrelli came to understand Charlie's resilience and willingness to grow made this remarkable neighbor a master in the art of thriving through times of dramatic change. As a gift to his children, he set out to tell Charlie's secrets. The Book of Charlie is a gospel of grit, an inspiring story of one man's journey through a century of upheaval. The history that unfolds through Charlie's eyes reminds readers that the United States has always been a divided nation, a questing nation, an inventive nation, a nation of Charlies on the roller coaster pursuit of a good and meaningful life. And so it was kind of funny because at the end, I got to the end of it, and when Charlie passed away, I actually cried. Like I had like a tear in my eye because we went through a whole journey together of 109 years. We went through a process. We got to walk together through his 109 years, and then when he finally passed away on his birthday, he was born on August 17th of 1905, and he died August 17th of 2014, and so he lived a really amazing life. So I was kind of like, man, I started missing Charlie when I got to the end of the book. It was kind of cool. And this David Vondrelli is a columnist editor for the Washington Post, where he writes about national affairs and politics from a home base in the Midwest. He is the author of the award-winning bestseller Triangle: The Fire That Changed America. He lives in Kansas City. So I don't know anything about this guy. I just picked up the book. And so it starts talking about when he moved to Kansas City. The author moved to Kansas City to get away from Washington, D.C. and all the drama and ridiculousness of Washington, D.C. And so he and his wife wanted to find a place somewhere in the Midwest to get away from. And he was a Colorado guy. So they moved out there, and they moved to this place in Kansas City. And he went outside one morning to, I don't know, pick the newspaper up or whatever out of the driveway. And he looked across the street, and there was an old man over there washing a car, a PT Cruiser. He said, yeah, he was describing it. And this old man was out there, and all he had on is a pair of shorts, and he had a mustache. He kind of had a little bit long hair or whatever. And that was Charlie. And he was washing his girlfriend's car out there underneath a shade tree that was over the driveway across the street from David. And so I guess maybe Charlie waved to him or motioned him over, and he went over there and struck up a relationship with him. And at the time, Charlie was 102 years old. So when David met him when he was 102 years old, and he was washing his girlfriend's car in the driveway across the street. So it's like, of course he was. By the time you get to the end of the book, you realize, man, of course he was. So I get into the book, and it just starts talking about Charlie's early life. And he was born in Galesburg, Illinois, which as soon as that happened, it was like, oh my gosh, this is this is an amazing story because Leslie, my wife's grandmother, is from Galesburg, Illinois, and she lived to be 97 years old. And she had a lot of the same kind of philosophy that Charlie used. And so when it was really cool because as soon as I read that, I just immediately started thinking about Miss McLean, Grandma McLean, and what a cool lady she was. And she had her brain all the way to the end. She was 97. Her body kind of failed her there towards the last few years, but she was a feisty lady. She was a lot of fun. She was super smart, and so there was an immediate connection for me to want to go ahead and learn more about Charlie's life. And so he was born. His dad was a pastor, and he had three sisters, I believe, two older and one younger. And his dad was a pastor, and his dad was a so they didn't have a lot of money when he was growing up, but he seemed always to be somewhat, I don't know, affluent, maybe just a little. Like he had somewhat of an advantage along the way. Um, but pastors, especially in 1905, there wasn't a lot of high dollar pastors back then. We didn't have TV stations and all that stuff. But one of the things that Charlie's dad had was he had a gift for finance, and so he would take over a church, and in taking over the church, he would um, go in and set the finances in order, and 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 then once he set the finances in order, he would end up moving on. And so they moved all over the place. They were going to all kinds of different towns, and they would move from one town to the next. It's almost like a football coach used to do or still does. You move from one town to the next and just keep going through life. And they ended up in Kansas City. And his dad was working at the church in Kansas City, but he also, on the side, sold life insurance. And Charlie was 8 years old, and his dad went to work one day, and he had gone to the building where he sold the life insurance, and it was a 9-story building, and it had an elevator. And you could just imagine so this would have been about 1913 or so, because Charlie was 8. So you could just imagine what elevators were like in buildings in 1913. They weren't the safest things ever. So Charlie's dad, he goes up to his office on the 8th or ninth floor, and then he needs to go run an errand or something. And he's actually, I think it said he was going to collect a premium from one of his clients, and he left to go get on the elevator, and he noticed that day that, I don't know how he noticed. They don't know that. The elevator man was not the same elevator man that usually ran the elevator back then. And as Charlie's dad was stepping onto the elevator, his foot slipped, and the guy hit the button, and the elevator rose up, and half of his body was out of the elevator and half of it was in, and it smashed him in half. And then the elevator guy didn't know what to do, so he pushed down on the elevator. Well, then he did that. Charlie's dad fell between the elevator shaft and the floor, and he fell all the way down and hit, and he fell 9 stories or 8 stories or whatever, and through the elevator shaft, and died. And so Charlie was 8 years old, and Charlie was pretty much protected. Like, he was raised in the church. He had a good family. He had a mom and dad that were together. He had everything was kind of, he was nurtured. As we go back, you remember our book, The Body Keeps the Score, right? The nurturing of his early childhood gave him somewhat of a ability to handle such a tragedy, right? But the tragedy really hit him hard, and it was really cool. It's a sad story, right? It's not cool that his dad died, but it was cool how what we have already talked about on our show, and the body keeps the score, and the whole idea between the thalamus and the amygdala and the upper cortex, and those ways that we handle tragedy, right? Well, he was 8 years old. He loved his dad. His mom and dad loved each other. they had a good family, and then all of a sudden, in one moment, one freak accident, Charlie's life is different. And his mom was all of a sudden without a husband and no income and four kids. And that's quite a shock on the whole entire family. And it made Charlie kind of have to grow up really, really fast. His mom kind of said, "Hey, all of a sudden you are the man of the house." So it's it's interesting. It was really tough on him. Like he had to really make a decision. He got forced into growing up really fast at the age of 8 in whatever that was, 1913. He had to really grow up super fast. So the story goes on about talking about some of the things that happened to him. And when we get back from the break, we got a break on the radio right now. And when we get back from the break, we'll get into the rest of Charlie's story and some of the things that I learned from the book that I think you might think is cool too. So you guys hang on, and we'll be right back. Yeah, so it was a sad deal for Charlie because all of a sudden he became responsible for everything in his house. And I want to just kind of, while we're on the break on the radio, I want to just kind of go back and make the connection by what we did talk about with the body keeps the score. Because from an early age, when we're developing at an early age, that connection that we have with our mother, that face-to-face contact that we have, those mirror neurons that we talked about, uh, that that help us have some sort of grip on our world, right? It's hard to understand how someone can handle that. You guys out there listening to the show, I'm sure someone's dealt with that type of tragedy before, right? But people say, how can one person handle something and somebody else can't handle it? Like, how do you know? Why does one person have a tragedy that happens to them when they're 8 years old, and they end up living 101 more years and becoming a medical doctor and traveling all over the world and doing all kinds of amazing things? How can that one person handle it, and someone else just completely fall apart? And it's really interesting when you get down and study it. And I've had some conversations in the office this week. I asked someone, like, I asked a lady this afternoon. I said, "How you doing?" And she said, "I'm doing great." And I said, "How's your brain?" And she said, "My brain is fantastic." And I just kind of laughed, and I told her, I said, "Well, you'd be a really unique individual if that's true, because most of the brains that I'm looking at and I'm working on, man, they're not quite fantastic." And and so she said, "Well, I'm just going to claim it." And she's like, "You got to watch your words." Well, fair enough. Like, that may be one strategy to be able to handle that type of thing, and handle it when it's super complicated in your life. But what we learn from the book, The Body Keeps the Score, is that those early childhood nurturing things that go on between a mother and a baby have a lot to do with how that baby is going to handle things in the future. And it's I can attest to that for myself. Like, I was very, very nurtured as a young child. Like, I was very, very nurtured. My mother was fantastic. She still is today. She got adjusted in the office, getting recovering from her knee replacement, and she's doing fantastic. She's in here walking on the treadmill and the anti-gravity treadmill that we have, and she's really she's really doing a great job. But I can tell you that I can attest that I felt a kinship with Charlie there, because, like, yeah, you're able to just handle some stuff that happens to you when other people might not be able to handle those same things. So we're going back to the radio. We'll be right back. Hang on. Okay, everybody, you're back. This is Jason Clemmons, and you are listening to Life with Jason Clemmons, DC. And we are breaking down the book of Charlie. And we've just gotten to the point where he had a major tragedy at 8 years old that kind of forced him to be the man of the house. And one of the things his mother said is like, we made him, she realized having three sisters and no father, and the mom had to get busy. Like the mom had the tragedy too, right? And the sisters had the tragedy too. And so what the mom had to do is the mom had to go to work, and she was she was doing some things with the the church and the mission work at the church, and she ended up having to rent out a room to traveling people that were coming through the church and missionaries and that type of thing. So they would rent out a room in their home. That was common back in the day, kind of like a original Airbnb, and so it was just kind of like it was. Hey, look, stuff happens, and you got to move on. You got to we can't just fold in the tent and shut her down right now, right? We got to move along with this whole thing. And that's kind of what his mom did too, and forced Charlie to be the man of the house. And one of the stories they said was back in the day, in order to keep the furnaces burning, they would the I don't know, the city, the power company of the day of 1913 would bring coal and dump it on the street in front of your house. And you had to get a wheelbarrow and take the coal around. Charlie had to fill that wheelbarrow up when he was 8 years old, and he had to haul that wheelbarrow around to the back of the house where the basement was, and then he had to take all that coal down into the basement where the furnace was, and that's the way they kept the furnace going and kept the house heated. And I just thought, man, can you imagine being 8 years old and having to like haul coal to your basement to keep your furnace going? Like, think about 8 year olds today, and how many of them can handle stuff like that. That's not a super common thing that's happening. So that was one of the things that Charlie was forced to do. So is what his mom decided is his mom decided, hey, I'll send him to summer camp, and that'll give him a chance to be around other boys, and he'll that'll give him some camaraderie or whatever, and so she sent him to summer camp, and this summer camp was run by this osteopathic doctor or something that was kind of a weirdo. Nothing, not has nothing to do with the osteopathic doctors, just in the story. But the first thing they did is they took all their clothes away from them. So the whole time they were at this summer camp, these boys were living out. They were like had to be outside and living on the land or whatever, doing all this stuff and roughing it out there with no clothes on. And David, the author, was like, man, that was kind of when Charlie told him that story, he's like, man, that's kind of a weird story to tell. And it was kind of it was like the suspicion was that either Charlie got molested by the camp leader, which they don't think so, but they think maybe he might have got molested by an older boy that was there at the camp. Because one of the things that they did with Charlie is moving forward in his life. So I think when he was in second grade, they moved him to third grade. And when he was in the middle of fourth grade, they moved him to fifth grade. So he was like 2 years younger than his class. But something went on at the camp. And he never talked about it to David. He never talked about it to his eventual kids. But they always suspected, just kind of based on some of the conversations that went on there, they kind of suspected that some things happened. So at a young, like before he was 9 years old, there was this idea that possibly, number one, his dad had gotten tragically killed, and number two, he had possibly gotten molested when he was at the summer camp. Now, did that rewire his whole brain? Did that rewire the way that he saw everything based on what we know about the brain? It could have. But the thing that the author points out is that he became stoic. And I've heard that word my whole life, but I really didn't understand exactly what it meant. Like, I really was had to break it down and really say what is stoicism. And you guys probably know what that means, but I didn't know what it meant. And it's a philosophy. It's a school of Hellenistic philosophy that flourished in ancient Greece and ancient Rome. The Stoics believed that a practice of virtue is enough to achieve a well-lived, flourished life, right? So this idea, and one of the, if you just Google what is Stoicism, the Stoicism is it's the endurance of pain or hardship without the display of feeling and without complaint. This ancient Greek school of philosophy, founded in Athens, the school taught that virtue, the highest good, is based on knowledge. The wise live a harmony with the divine reason that governs nature and are indifferent to the vicissitudes of fortune and to pleasure and pain. So they're just kind of neutral to the thing, right? You guys probably know what that means. I asked the girls in the staff meeting if they knew what that meant, and they were kind of on purpose with it. But I didn't know what it meant. So I had to kind of look it up as they were breaking it down right there. And you can kind of understand, maybe if you're 8 years old, you get thrown into the fire and you just finally you get educated at a really early age that there's some awesome things in life and there's some things in life that suck. And what are you going to do about it? Right? You're going to go in the tank, you're going to throw in the towel, or you're just going to move along. And Charlie just decided, for whatever reason, maybe it was trauma, maybe it was the way that he dealt with trauma, but he just decided to move along. And he was like, hey, sometimes bad things happen and you just got to move along. So that was one of the things I learned from the book, that really that definition and that philosophy right there. And it's kind of the way when we got to the end of the book and some of the things I read it in our staff meeting, and my wife said, that sounds just like you. And I thought, that's kind of interesting. So maybe she's always said I'm hard to read and I'm emotionless, and I don't know if I am, but there's just things that happen, right? You got to play. Sometimes you throw interceptions like that. Sometimes you strike out. Sometimes you just screw the whole thing up. And I've done that lots of times in my life. And sometimes you're the hero, and sometimes it works all out like you thought it would. And you planned it out and mapped it out and it worked like you thought. And sometimes people do bad things to you, and sometimes people mistreat you. And what are you going to do about it? Well, Charlie just went on with it. So he went on, he got back, he went through his school, he graduated school, and he and his buddies decided they were going to drive to California. He wanted to go to Los Angeles. And these are where these adventures started. He graduated high school, didn't have any money. He knew if he asked his mom and dad to go, that they were going to, or if he asked his mom to go and his friends asked their mom and dad if they could go, they would all say no. So the three boys, his two friends and he, borrowed his dad's Model T Ford. So he's 18 years old. So this is, he was born in 2005. So whatever this is, maybe he's 17 years old at this time. And all of a sudden, he and his two friends decide they're just going to drive to California from Kansas City. So they're living in Kansas City, and they just decide they're just going to drive to California. They didn't even tell anybody they were going. They just got in the car. They told them they were going to go out on the outside of town and work on the farms to raise some money for college. And their parents were like, all right. So they just went out there, worked on the farms till they could raise some money. And then it just tells the story about them driving all the way across from Kansas City. And they hit the Rocky Mountains, made a left turn because they were like, I don't know how we're going to get this car over these mountains. And made a left turn, went down to the Raton Pass and had to push the car. Two guys got out of the car. They said it was a light car, so it really wasn't that big a deal. And they got out and pushed the car over the Raton Pass. And if you guys, I'm sure, especially people from West Texas, if you've ever been to Colorado, you've gone through the Raton Pass, and that's pretty interesting to get out of the car and be able to push that dude over the pass. That's kind of crazy. They went through kind of that northern New Mexico area, got out into Arizona in the desert, and there wasn't any roads. All they were following was trails. Can you imagine being 17 years old, not telling your parents where you're going, your mom where you're going, and you and your friends borrow your dad's car, somebody's dad's car, and take off. And now you're going through. I mean, there's not even a road out there. You're just following these ruts, and 20 miles an hour is about as good as you could do. Like 70 miles a day was about as much as they could do. It took a whole week or 10 days or something like that to get all the way to California. But they made it. They made it through. They made it through all the towns, and they told the story about going through the towns. They got out there to California, and the dude whose dad owned the car decided, man, I'm going to sell the car and get some money so I can go home. So he sells his dad's car. He sells his dad's car. I can't imagine that conversation that went on when they got home. But he sells his dad's car, and then he calls his mom, and his mom gets mad, and she goes all the way out there and picks him up and leaves Charlie and the other guy in California. She won't even bring the other two boys back. She just brings her own son back. So Charlie has to figure out how to get home. So he and his friend decide they'll just jump some trains and make it home. Well, the first train they jumped, it wasn't going east. It was going north to San Francisco. So they ended up in San Francisco. And then they get on the trains, and it's an interesting story because he gets arrested, and then they throw him in jail for the night. And he was like, this is really good because at least I had a place to sleep and something to eat. And then they made us work. The train station caught us, and then they made us work. And so we worked, and we get paid for 10 days. And then we decided we had enough money, we could take off and go. And so they would anyway, he jumped the trains all the way back. One of the first one he jumped, he got up on the top of the train car and had to ride that through the whole state of Nevada or something. He said the nights were freezing cold, and him and his buddy would huddle up. And then during the day, the sunshine would just beat them to death. And then they got kicked off the top of the train. And so they maneuvered their way back once the guy turned his head and wasn't looking. And they got on the cow catcher on the front of the train. And they rode the last 3 or 4 days on the cow catcher all the way back to Kansas City. Can you imagine that? You're just out of high school. You're 17 years old, and you're just riding a train all the way across. So then he ends up going to deciding that he's going to go to college. Ends up going to the University of Missouri, and in the process of all that, he learns how to play the saxophone. And he didn't know anything about music, but he had been listening on the radio when he was a young child. He's like, Mama, keep us up until so-and-so band was coming on. I don't remember the name of the band, but his mama, he'd tell her, don't let me go to sleep until I can listen to this band. And so he learned to play all the songs of the band. And he started his own band right after high school. And as he was going to college, that's the way he paid for things. Is he went to college and worked in the band, and had this, and they would do gigs around town, which I thought was really interesting because my dad did some of that himself back in the day. He was a drummer in a band while he was going through college. I thought, wow, that's kind of interesting. Just a side note to that. And then we went on. He decided he was going to graduate, and his sister, one of the guys that had been coming through and rented a room in their house, was a medical doctor, and he got to befriending Charlie, and ended up marrying his sister, and so that became his brother-in-law. And see, he was about 9 years older than Charlie, so he thought, man, this guy kind of became his hero. And so he's like, I want to go to medical school. And he graduated and he had a really strict professor at the University of Missouri where he went to undergraduate, and he really had to learn a lot, like is in biochemistry or something like that. And he had to learn, he had to work super hard right there. And so his brother-in-law had gone to Northwestern University to medical school. And so Charlie decided he wanted to go to medical school at Northwestern University. And so I'm going to pick up the book right here because this is where it was talking about that. It was Willits was the brother-in-law's name. Excuse me, was 9 years older than Charlie at a time when life at a time in life when 9 years is everything, especially to a fatherless boy in need of footsteps to follow. The importance of the friendship and role modeling can be seen in the fact that Charlie began to build his future on the blueprint of his oldest brother-in-law. Willits was a young doctor, which made Charlie believe he could be a doctor too. Willits was a graduate of the medical school at Northwestern University in Chicago. So as his undergraduate career approached its end, Charlie also set his sights on Northwestern. To his dismay, Northwestern turned Charlie down. He sent in an application and they said no. What happened next was pure Charlie White. His rejection, a hard blow, but it did not leave him powerless. This is a great story right here. I was like, man, you got to read this part. The disappointment could be turned into a challenge, a chance to test his own strength. He boarded a train for Chicago, found his way to Evanston, and located the office of the medical school dean. Though he had no appointment, Charlie announced himself at the desk and sat down to wait until the dean would see him. A picture of the baffled look on the dean's face. The author says, I pictured the baffled look on the dean's face when his assistant informed him that a persistent young man from Missouri had planted himself in the waiting room. Evidently, curiosity got the better of the man because Charlie was ushered into the dean's office. Talking fast, Charlie explained why turning him away was a mistake. Perhaps Lyle Willits gave him a pep talk, encouraging Charlie to feel that he was up to the rigors of Northwestern. Certainly, he went armed with his record at Missouri as evidence of his study habits. Whatever Charlie said, it worked. He talked his way in. The author says this. He says, my kids and I have argued on this score. They tell me that no one goes ahead through a face-to-face contact anymore. Job hunting, networking, and the pursuit of opportunity all happen online. You fill out an electronic form, post a digital resume, click the button, and accept your fate. But I'm not sure I believe it. Technology changes, but people don't. A human touch will always matter. An earnest young person confidently making a case is as powerful today as a century ago. Maybe it's no longer possible to talk your way into an elite medical school, but you can still be your own best advocate. No one else can do it as well. As for the risk of rejection, Charlie had already been rejected. His trip to the dean's office offered only upside. That's a super cool story right there, right? It's like, hey, I sent an application to Northwestern, and Northwestern didn't want me. And so what am I going to do? Just accept defeat? No. And I can tell you, I've done that a couple times in my life. When I was in high school, we won the back-to-back state championships in football, and I was a starting quarterback from our football team. I was an all-state quarterback, had a 4.0 GPA, was 26-2 as a starting quarterback for 2 years with back-to-back state championships, and nobody wanted me except for Eastern New Mexico. And that's where I went for that first year. But after that first year, I thought to myself, you know what? Leslie was wanting to go to Tech, and I said, hey, I think I just want to go to Tech and see if I can play at Tech. And so I came to Lubbock. I had my coach call for me and see if I could get a meeting. And I came to Lubbock and sat with Coach Spike Dykes right here in his office. And I sat down in his office and I said, Coach, look here. I think I could play at this level. And I know that you guys don't know that, but I'd like to have a chance to do it. And if I can do it, I'm going to need a scholarship. And if I can't do it, then I want to be a football coach. So I'll quit playing and then I'll just coach. But I'm not going to live the rest of my life wondering whether or not I could have or not. And he said, fair enough. He said, Jason, I'll tell you what, if you're good enough to stay, I'll give you a scholarship. And that's the last we talked about that for an entire year. he didn't say another word to me about that scholarship for an entire year. And what did I do? I put my nose down and I went to work. I didn't miss a single workout in the weight room for an entire year. Worked out 4 days a week for the entire year. When 2 days was over, the walk on quarterbacks. When I got there, I was on the first day I got there. I was late getting there for 2 days because they didn't. They first they told me don't worry about it. You can come in after school, and then they said you can afterwards. You can. They said come on in. So I got there late, but I didn't know hardly anybody there. I didn't talk to anybody for an entire semester. I went to my dorm room, went in by myself. I didn't have a roommate for that whole semester because my first roommate was an idiot and he left school during 2 days. And so I was by myself in the dorm. Leslie was with me. She was the one I spent my extra time with. But I went to work earning myself a scholarship. And as soon as 2 days was over, Coach Dyke said, or Coach Winder, our quarterback coach, said, none of you guys have to stay. You guys can go, and all of you walk-ons. And then when everybody else left, I just stayed in the hallway, and I let all those other guys leave, and I stood there, and I said, Coach Winder, can I come to the meetings? Would you let me if I wanted to? And he just kind of looked at me funny, and he's like, I guess you can. He was a mean old fella, and he's like, I guess you can, but you can't cause any troubles. Don't say any. Just you be quiet back there. And I was like, yes, sir. So for the entire football season of 1990, I went to every quarterback meeting except one day I had to go meet my advisor. But I went to every quarterback meeting for the entire football season. And Coach Winder didn't say a single word to me until the very last week of the season. And we were sitting in there getting ready to play Houston. And he said to me, he's like, all right, Clemmons. It was before the meeting started. But every week I got a scouting report. Every single week I got a scouting report, and I got to listen to what was going on with the game plan. But then after the game plan, I had to leave and go to the scout team. And then that day he said, all right, Clemmons, and he put a play up on the board. I mean on the video, on the film, and he's like, here's what we're running, what's the coverage? And I told him what the coverage was, and he said, where are you going to go with the ball? And I told him where I was going to go with the ball, and he just turned around and looked at me, and he just shook his head, didn't say a word. That's the only time he talked to me for the whole 12, 13 weeks of the football season right there, right? And when I heard Charlie tell that story about what he was going to do, like getting that story done, it was, I thought, that's what I'm talking about right there. You decide what you're going to be for life. You decide how it's going to go. Don't let other people tell you how it's going to go. Go in there and sit face to face with that man and say, hey, look, you've made a mistake. I met Coach Dykes in my best friend's living room. I told you about my best friend that died in the middle of a football game, right? He was a highly recruited guy. And that's where I met Coach Dykes for the first time when I was in high school. But the next year after I'd gone to Eastern, I went back and sat in his office, and I sat in front of him and I said, Coach, and I went through that whole season, went through spring ball, almost won the spring game, got beat 14-7, but had a good spring game. And when I got back for 2 days, Coach Dykes gave me my scholarship. And I could feel that reward that Charlie got from going to medical school. He ended up going to medical school. He ended up when World War II started, he joined the armed forces, ended up getting to become an anesthesiologist, and after the war had a lot to do with how anesthetics was done in the United States. Became one of the most prominent anesthesiologists, and went through the process. He actually had something to do with the first people that got heart transplants. He figured out how to get them in ice. He would put them in a trough full of ice, and that was something that Charlie did right there. So, hey, I tell you what, we've run long on the show. We've reached the end of the show tonight. I'm sorry that we talked so much, but I think it's an awesome book. And on the next show, we're gonna finish it up, and we're gonna finish Charlie on our next show. So you guys have a great evening, and I'll see you on the next show. Okay, sorry, Facebook group. Yeah, we're going to go over this some more because I just kind of got through about half the book tonight. It's kind of crazy that you could talk for 50 minutes to get through half the book, but there's some good stories in there, and there's some really good stories about perseverance. And the thing that really got me, the thing that was the most important thing of the whole book to me, when you talk about a 109-year-old man, how did he get to be a 109-year-old man? He just took things as they came. He didn't put too much emphasis on one things one way or the other. And he always had something to do. He was always trying to learn new things. He was always trying to make himself smarter. He was always trying to carry things forward. He was always trying to learn, and he was always trying to figure out how to become better. And he was all the way into, like, he was 99 years old and he was still doing rounds at the hospital. Like it's the biggest thing about the book, I think, is the why. It's not the what's. And it's just a really cool thing to me to read this book, because that's exactly the truth. That's what I've been saying. It's not about what you eat. It's not about what you drink. It's not about what you're doing exercise wise until you decide what you're going to do with your life. And if you just decide, hey, this is what I'm going to do with my life, I'm going to live it full speed every day. I'm going to have something to do today. I'm going to keep it going and keep it going. And if you do, you'll get to the end of the whole thing, and it'll work for a long time. That was what Charlie taught me. Charlie said, hey, you want to get to 113 years old? Then have something to do. Stay after it. Enjoy the ride. Keep it going right there. Charlie didn't talk about broccoli and fish oil. Charlie was busy doing stuff. And I learned a lot from Charlie. So I hope you guys enjoyed that. That was a fun book. If you want to read it, it's a cheap little book. I think it was $25 or something, $26. Didn't take me 2 days to read the whole thing. It was a great book. If you got any comments, questions about it, feel free to let us know. And otherwise, you guys have a great night. I will not be on the show tomorrow night. I need to get that straightened out with the radio. But we've got a football game here, Texas Tech and TCU tomorrow night. And I am the husband to the assistant of the tailgate. So I've been told by the girls in my life, we're going to be at the football game. So you better get in the car and come with us. So that's what I'm going to be doing tomorrow night. And then we'll be back on Friday night with the show. So you guys have a great evening. And hopefully the Rangers take care of business tonight and be the world champs. And otherwise, I'll see you guys on Friday.